So what I want to do is I want to have a cube going along, and then at the end I just want it to turn into a sphere. That's all I want. Changing a cube into a sphere. And I want to have them moving along and then swapping over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a null, and under the null I'm going to create a cube and a sphere. And then I'm going to hide the sphere. And then I want to drag the null across. And I want to have that animating across my scene. So I'm going to drag the null into here. Now, I don't have to drag the entire null. What I could also do is I could just drag in the X parameter. If I just want to animate the X parameter, I could do that, but I'll drag in the null and it'll create like an entire position, scale, rotation setup in here as well for you. So I've got that, and I want this to animate over 30 frames. And what I want to happen at the end frame is I want it to be somewhere over here. So I'm just going to click go to end frame, and it's going to change the timeline to wherever this node ends in the time frame. So imagine if you've got lots of connected ones, you can click on any of these nodes and it'll jump to the timeline location of that particular node. And at this frame, I want this to be moved across. So I'm just going to move this across, and then I'm going to go set end. So now you can see I've set the end position here of the X value. So if I was to scrub this timeline, now you see it's going to animate from 0 to frame 30. And now at frame 30, that's when I want it to swap from being a sphere to, from a cube to being a sphere. So I'm going to click on the cube, and under basic, I'm going to drag in the enabled. And I'm just going to connect these two up here. And I'm going to say it's going to start. By default, it will just swap whatever state is there. So it's going from the start, and it's going to turn it to off. If I scrub back, you'll see the cube's there, and now it's gone. Okay, and at the same point, what I want to do is I want the sphere to be made visible. So I have the sphere. I'm going to drag in the enabled for the sphere, and it already knows that it was off initially. So now its opposite state is to enable it. And so now, if I was to scrub this, the cube is off, the sphere is on. So now we've got this going along, and the cube changes into a sphere. Let's just do one more thing on here. Let's make that sphere. So if I click the sphere, drag in the radius, let's make the radius go from 100 up to maybe. And so now if I was to play, it's going to go along, and the sphere will grow. And now that we've got this little animation, we might want to do something like perhaps you want to have it bouncing backwards and forwards, or you might want to loop this. So you can come up to the flow tag itself, and you can change that from once to, let's say, ping pong. And with ping pong selected, you can click the set timeline to anim length, and it'll adjust the timeline so that it'll fit the ping pong duration of the entire animation. It's going to go across and then rewind all the way back. And that's not actually what I want. I want this to start resizing as soon as the sphere is enabled. So I'm actually going to drag it from here and drop it onto there. And so it's going to happen at the same time as everything else now. So we go along, gets bigger, gets smaller, goes back. So the animation's length is wrong there again. So I click set anim timeline there, and now I'll have the correct timeline to make that loop perfectly. And again, if we want to control this manually, we can come up and go manual. And now we've got a manual adjustment between that. And if you go back to the timeline, we can change and use some of these easings, like the quadratic ease in and out, to give it a bit more of an interesting look. And so you can just keep adding on things, as we showed that other example, and just make this more and more complex. There's a few other interesting things in here, and one is you can go from start to the end. You can also make it go from the current value to the end value. So let's say I've got this sphere is growing, and now I might want to change that to, I'm going to hold down Control and drag another copy and just connect that up. And I'm going to have this go from the current value to the end value. And you notice how it did that by default. So initially when you drag something on, it's going to be start to end because that's all you've got. But if you Control and drag a copy, it's going to be current end. You can also Control Alt, and it will drag it and have it automatically connect to that value. And if you go Control Shift, it will actually connect it to the parent value. So there's a little couple of helpers in there. But I want Control Alt, drag that, says at the current end. And if I click go to end frame for this, I'm now going to make that maybe really small. And then I'm going to do one more. Oh, we'll just play that first and we'll see what that looks like. So I'm going to set that timeline again and then click play. It's going to go across and I'm going to change that back to linear. So you can see it gets big, goes small, big again, and then it comes back and then goes back to where it was. If I was to set this to this one here to first frame, what it's going to do is it's just going to take whatever value that it's at the moment, and it's going to return it back to the value that it was at the very start of this entire animation, which just happens to be that 100 value there. So now if I was to play this, it's going to get big, go back to that same value. Although we've got this ping pong set. So if I go once, it's going to get big, go back to the start value of the sphere, and then it's going to reloop. There's one other additional thing in here, and that is additive. So if you add one of those, it's just going to add to this. So if I now Control Alt and duplicate this and duplicate it and duplicate it, current, so they need to be set to additive as well. So by default, it'll do the current to end. So if you want to do the additive, you need to set it to additive. You can see it's just going to get bigger and then bigger and then bigger again. Now, as well as all these parameters in here, this also works with pretty much every value that you can drag in, and that includes material values. So if I was to put this material on the sphere, and then if I have this material selected, I can select the color. I can drag the color in. So around about here, I can maybe make it go to a red color, and then if I get to here, I'll connect it to that one. I'll make the color go from whatever the current color is at to a blue color. So it's now, I should be going from red to blue. It's red and goes to blue. So you can drag in pretty much any parameter from here. So if you've got a text, for instance, in here, and I drag on this text, then I can make it go from here, and I can change that from start text will be red, and then it's going to go to blue. And if I now play that back, it's going to be red, and then we can't see it because I've hidden it from view. Let's go back, rewind that. It's red and blue.